So what we're going to cover over the next 20 minutes, 30 minutes or so is complaint handling. And complaint handling is one of those core functions of a life insurance company. And I will go ahead and keep us moving through slides here. For those who may not know me, I'm with Cefali, and I am the Vice President of Compliance and Ethics. I've been with Cefali for about a year at this point, and prior to that, I worked for a large life insurance company, and before that, I was with an insurance department. So I'm coming at compliance issues from a number of different angles. We have a very brief agenda for today. I'll do a quick overview. We're going to talk about what is and is not a complaint. That's very important, especially as you're trying to triage correspondence that may be coming into a company. We're going to talk about how complaint data is used, both within a company and by regulators. We're going to talk about some internal impacts with the complaint handling process. We're going to talk about how to respond to complaints, and equally important, what not to do when you're working with complaints. And I can't stress that enough. We'll get there though. So first, wanted to spend a little bit of time defining what a complaint is. And as I've noted on the screen here, the NAIC model regulation defines a complaint. And Don had mentioned earlier that the NAIC stands for the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. They have model regulations. Those regulations may or may not be adopted by a state insurance department. And those states that do adopt the models may or may not adopt them verbatim. But it at least serves as a common thread, if you will, within the industry on a given topic of market regulation. So the NAIC does have a model regulation, and they do define what a complaint is. And I think it's important to recognize that state variations will differ, but the primary definition for a complaint is a written communication that's primarily expressing a grievance. So somebody is concerned about something, they're upset about something, and it's in written form. While most states follow that same definition, again, there is some variation. Sometimes complaints can be verbal, and a company may need to track them. So let's talk a little bit about how complaints are received, because I think that's very important. The most common way to receive complaints is going to be you get a letter in the mail, you get an email from a consumer, and they've indicated they've got a concern with their policy or their contract. But that is not the only way that information comes into a company as a complaint. What you will see is you'll get not only emails and letters, but you might find that there are complaints that are woven in social media posts. A lot of people don't necessarily think to look at that, and if they see a complaint, social media posts are written, that needs to be forwarded on to the complaint department. You'll also see complaints that come in through producers, and it's important that producers know to hand that information off to the company's complaint department. Different consumers may be sending in premium notices. They may write their complaint right on their premium notice. That's an important consideration. You need to recognize that that's also a complaint, even though it didn't go directly to the complaint department. And then finally, not only will you receive complaints from consumers, but you'll also receive complaints from other third parties. And that can include the state insurance departments. It can include governor's offices, legislators. Some consumers go right to their legislature, and a state senator or state representative or assembly person may contact the company seeking some assistance with resolution, and state attorney generals. So think of complaints very broadly because they really do come from a number of different sources. As I mentioned, the NAIC has a model regulation for your reference on the screen. It's model regulation number 884. It's been around for a while, a couple of decades, and we've included a link to the model in the materials. And I just want to pause here and let everybody know that all of the slide presentations that we're going through today and tomorrow, those are all out within the app, your conference app, so we encourage you to use that. You can see the materials, you can see the agenda, you can see who else has registered for the event. That is a great resource for you. Additionally, the presentation decks are also on cefali.org. So if there's anything you want to look back at more detail later, know that those materials are available to you. So, as I mentioned before, we do have the NAIC model. They define a complaint, and they define specific record-keeping requirements. Aside from that, there's not a whole lot of content to that model. So I'll keep moving here. I mentioned that state insurance department regulations do vary, and that is so important to keep in mind. Of primary concern is definition. Not every state follows the same definition. Most are relatively consistent, and most do limit their definition of complaints to be written statements of dissatisfaction. Codes can vary as well. Individuals who are working on complaints have to identify by the NAIC standards or state standards what is the product code, what is the disposition code. So it's important to recognize what those codes are for the given states and make sure that your complaint records are aligned. Response times, another area where things will vary from state to state. Some states may require you to respond within a certain number of days directly to the department if it's a regulatory complaint and then to the consumer. Other states may require you to respond to the consumer directly and copy the department. Always be very careful about what the state is actually asking for if it happens to be a regulatory complaint. And as you're working with states or with complaints across different states, know that the timing requirements will vary. One state might say it has to be resolved within 20 days, another state might indicate 30, another might say 10 days, and sometimes states will even have additional requirements where you have to acknowledge the consumer's complaint within a certain number of days and then resolve it within a later time period. Submission requirements. So here's an area where I wanted to spend just a couple of minutes on. Each state has different requirements. Some states are still in paper form and they require a paper response be sent to the insurance department if it's a regulatory complaint. Other states are more electronic. Some states have a portal to submit information. Other states, and I've seen this in the past, will say, well, here's the complaint if you can respond to us via email. And I'm just going to pause because this is important. If you do have a state regulator that asks you to respond to a complaint via email, make sure that you are not doing that unless you are sending it in a secure way. So many times with complaints, you have sensitive information. It can be account numbers. It can be people's addresses. It could be an application that contains a social security number or date of birth. You always want to make sure that no matter how you're responding to complaints, whether it's to regulators or directly to consumers, that you're using a secure means and you're safeguarding that data. Very important. So why do we need to pay attention to complaints? Certainly there are a number of reasons, and I'm going to go through primarily 4 reasons here today. First is the Market Conduct Annual Statement. It's also known as MCAS. And with MCAS, it is a schedule of data, and it's by product line that companies are required to submit on an annual basis to the insurance departments that require such submissions, and that's most insurance departments. And what happens is by product line on the schedule, this is just one example, and in the box with the gold here, this happens to be an individual cash value life insurance schedule, and they're asking for the company's complaint ratio. So what the states have done is defined for carriers how to determine their ratio, and companies have to self-report what their complaint numbers are. So it's important that everybody handles complaints appropriately, that things are centrally logged and tracked, because you're going to have to report that information later to the insurance departments through the Market Conduct Annual Statement process. Second, market conduct exams. If you're unfamiliar with a market conduct examination, count yourself lucky. It's a process, and it does require some special attention and care. It's basically a review of your company's operations, or on the financial side, financial condition, done by the regulators. And as part of the market conduct examination process, the states will look at complaints. With almost any examination, they're going to be looking at complaints, and they're going to be asking questions. They're going to send you what's called a standard data request, or an SDR, which is going to have you provide data, numeric information that the states need to do their review, or they're going to be asking you standard interrogatory questions. They may ask you to explain your complaint process. They may ask you to explain what you consider a complaint to be. They may also explain or ask you to provide copies of policies and procedures. So what I have on this screen is an excerpt from the Market Conduct Handbook that is put together by the regulators to guide their examinators when they're conducting a market conduct exam. And it is just guidance. So not every state is going to follow it, but many do. And you'll see here there are a number of things that the individual states are looking at. Number one, they're looking at the required format of the company's complaint register. They're checking to see if the company has adequate complaint handling procedures. Have they been handling complaints timely? Are they responding consistent with the requirements in a given state? So again, number two reason for monitoring your complaints is that you're going to have to provide data and it's going to be reviewed during market conduct examinations. Number three, complaint ratios and related company complaint data can be accessed at an aggregated level by consumers directly from the NAIC website. So whether you realize that or not, we've got a link here that you can look at offline, and you can go out and you can look at any company. You can search the company. You can identify what their complaint ratios look like. Got an excerpt from the NAIC screen here. You can look at results by company code. You can look at it by state for a given company. You can look at it by licensing, a certain type of company. You can look at financials. So more and more, a company's data, whether it's market conduct or financial, is accessible by consumers and other third parties through public databases. And it's not just consumers. It can be plaintiffs' counsel. It can be your competitors. Really, it's public information. So you want to make sure that you are appropriately responding to complaints and trying to manage your complaint process for that reason as well. Next, you always want to manage your complaints because complaints can help support the company's reputation or it can erode the company's reputation. And once you lose your reputation or your reputation is tarnished, it takes a lot to restore that confidence with consumers. So definitely an important consideration. There can be financial impacts as well. So if a company isn't handling their complaint process appropriately, those things can escalate. And it may take more effort in order to fix a situation. You may have to, if you don't handle a complaint about, for example, a consumer loan appropriately right up front, you may end up revisiting it multiple times. That costs money. And the fix may cost more later by not addressing things on the front end. Now, that doesn't mean that every complaint is going to be resolved to the consumer satisfaction. That's not the goal or objective of a complaint process. The complaint process is for the consumer to have the ability to let the company know that they feel something is not correct or that they have a concern, and then for the company to research that issue to determine whether that is the case and whether additional action is needed or not needed. And finally, the last bullet point or the last note on the slide is the reference to potential litigation. So to the extent that a company is not appropriately handling its complaints, consumers may continue to push and actually pursue litigation. That may be through individual lawsuits or it could be through class action litigation. So again, the goal with complaints is not to just write a check and make the consumer happy. Instead, rather, that's a bad precedent to set because you do want to treat all of your consumers fairly. But you do want to take complaints seriously and you want to make sure you're fully investigating them. Responding to complaints. So when responding to complaints, there's a number of things to consider. And one of the things that is so important is to educate all of your business partners on the complaint process. Often complaints are received across the company. And one thing that a company absolutely has to do is maintain a centralized complaint log. So to the extent that producers are receiving complaints or the claims area might receive complaints or payment services, that information all needs to funnel to the complaint department. Now, your complaint handlers may partner with others in the organization as they research the complaint merits and respond to the consumer, but it's the complaint department that's keeping that central log of information. So make sure you're educating your business partners about what a complaint is and what they should do if they do receive a complaint. Also, educate your business partners about how to provide information to you in response to the complaint. Always very important that if business partners are providing information, whether it's for an examination or in response to a complaint, they're double checking their information. If they're calculating values, they're making certain that those values are accurate. When you have misinformation, it can erode trust and it can make the company not look as well as it could. So that's important to re-emphasize with all of your business partners. Let's talk a little bit about producers. That's a unique group, and producers are often the first face-off with consumers. They're often face-to-face with consumers, and they may be the first line of defense with a complaint. Producers may have a tendency, they have great pride in their work, as they should, but they may have a tendency to jump in and just resolve things. It's very important that producers also understand that the company needs to be aware of any complaints and the home office needs to be involved. I mentioned centralization of complaints and the complaint log, so I'll move on to the next, date stamping. Let's talk a little bit about that. So when do you actually receive a complaint? It's not the day that the complaints department gets it. So let's take, for example, a claim, and something's not going well through the claim process. When the claims department receives a complaint, that's the day that the company received the complaint. And if the claims department takes 3 days to get it over to compliance or the company's complaint department, you just lost 3 days responding to that complaint. So it's when the company first received notice of the complaint, that's what starts your timing. Likewise, if a producer receives a complaint, that's when the clock starts. If the producer doesn't provide that information to the home office right away, you're losing valuable time in terms of your timeline for responding timely. Another thing that I want to point out is reviewing and analyzing the complaint issue. So with every complaint, they're all unique. You have a different set of facts, you have a different type of consumer, you have a different issue that needs to be resolved. There's general themes, but each complaint is unique, and that requires a unique response in many cases. It's very important to take a look at the complaint and to understand and analyze what is the fact situation, and make sure, the last bullet point on the left here, make sure that when you're responding to the complaint, you are answering the question that was raised. Often with a consumer complaint, they're asking multiple things. So it's very important to make sure that when responding, you've really done a double check and made sure if the consumer had 6 questions or issues they were concerned about, make sure all 6 of those are being responded to. You want to make sure that your communications are polished. They look professional. You want to do proofreading, and I'll share a little insight on that a little bit later here. You want to make sure you're responding timely. So I've got 2 categories here, responding timely to consumers and responding timely to regulators. There may well be 2 different deadlines for that. Some complaints are directly from consumers, and those are the only parties involved. Other complaints will come from third parties, as I mentioned before, which could be a regulator, a legislator, attorney general, state attorney general. So make sure that you know your timelines for responding and you're adhering to those. As I mentioned earlier, you want to make sure your coding is correct. You have to keep track of complaints by product type, by disposition code, etc. And then the second last bullet point I mentioned briefly when we talked about the market conduct exam process, and that is policies and procedures. Make sure the company has established policies and procedures for handling complaints. So to the extent you have procedures in place, those procedures should adhere and align to the regulatory requirements in the states that you're doing business. But when you have a market conduct exam, keep in mind you may be completely accurate in your compliance with state requirements, but if you are deviating from your established written policies and procedures, that is an area where the regulator may come back and point out that you have a procedure but you're not following it. So just be aware that you need to be careful about both state requirements and being consistent with what you've established as your policies and your procedures. And finally, record retention. That is an area that actually varies greatly from company or from state to state. Make sure you know how long you need to retain the complaint records after you've resolved the complaint. Okay, let's talk a little bit about what not to do. And here's where it gets a little bit interesting. It's always important to know what to do, and as I established early on, it's equally important to know what you shouldn't be doing. And there's a long list that goes with that, and I'm just going to cover a few items here today. Don't act unprofessionally. So I'm going to share an actual true story here. Back when I worked for an insurance regulator, I had the misfortune, I guess, of working with a producer that was very upset about a complaint that was filed about him. And the consumer was very concerned about the issue not being resolved. They contacted the insurance department. They provided the correspondence that the producer provided to the consumer. The consumer provided what he received. And the producer had sent a written letter to the consumer. And on the outside of that written letter, it had the consumer's name and address, but it also had attention, and he wrote the word loser. So a producer actually went to the consumer, tried to resolve the complaint himself in a very derogatory way. So again, earlier in the slide, we talked about training your producers. It's hard from a producer perspective. Somebody may be criticizing what you recommended or your service, but it's so important that producers remain, and everybody remains professional throughout the process. Second bullet point, don't throw others under the bus. Sometimes when you're looking through a complaint, you find that there is a reason why something didn't go well. Maybe a given department didn't do something right. Maybe there's a sale and it involved two producers working jointly and someone didn't do what they should have. Always take the high road. If you get a statement from a producer that indicates that somebody didn't do what they were supposed to, that's an opportunity to educate the producer on perhaps a better way to respond. More appropriately, it might be, we apologize that we didn't do this correctly, we'll go ahead and fix it, versus calling somebody out. I talked about the importance of responding timely and responding to all of the issues that are raised. That's especially important with the next bullet point in consolidation here, and that is making sure that if the regulator is asking for a producer statement or the company is asking for a producer statement, that the producer is answering all of the allegations or questions. Not uncommon for a producer to work quickly to put together a response that he or she feels is responsive to the matter, and it maybe didn't address a specific item. So watch that very carefully. And then the last bullet point here is make sure that you proofread your response. So by proofreading, you're looking for, your basic things like your formatting, professionalness of the communication, you're running your spell check, you're making sure that it's responding to the issue and you're covering all your bases. But be very careful and meticulous about your proofreading. I'll share another true story here. Some of you are probably very well familiar with when you're typing an email or you have a document open in Word, there can be an autocorrect. And that autocorrect doesn't always change the word to what you would like it to actually read. And it's frustrating because you can do a spell check and you won't recognize that something is askew. So you really have to carefully review correspondence. Actual true story, years back, prior to CEFLI's existence, there was the Insurance Marketplace Standards Association, or IMSA. As part of that process, independent assessors would go into insurance companies and review processes and offer feedback on how companies are doing. At one point in my career, I was talking with an IMSA assessor, and that assessor was going to be reviewing the company's complaints. And I asked her a little bit about what she's looking for when she's reviewing complaints, and if she's just looking at regulatory requirements or if she's going beyond that. And she gave me an example of something that she had come across. It was a situation where a consumer was complaining about an annuity product. It was a very senior lady who was the annuity owner, and she was in her 90s. And something happened with the contract where she had a dispute. The company was working to resolve it. Unfortunately, in their letter, spell check took over and did something that wasn't exactly what the company was looking for. They, at the end of their letter, indicated that they apologized for any inconvenience that may have happened as a result of the complaint. Unfortunately, spell check took it and revised it to say, we apologize for any incontinence this may have caused. So you could just imagine the horror, I'm sure, of whatever company it was that the IMSA assessor was pointing out they found in the materials. But again, don't rely on spell check. Always be very careful about reviewing materials to make sure that they say what you think they should say. And then finally here, just think of it as a frame of context that complaints are a gift. Complaints help us do better. Complaints help us understand how our consumers perceive us as companies. They help us understand where we may have correspondence that could be a little bit more articulate. They help us identify potentially systemic issues in need of a fix. Maybe a policyholder statement isn't reporting correct values in an area. You get a couple of complaints. That's an opportunity to work with the business area to say, what can we do to fix this? So always view complaints as a gift. They're not a burden. It's an opportunity for us to do better. It's an opportunity to solidify a relationship with your insureds and policy owners. It's always much easier to retain a client than to go and get new clients. So we want to make sure that we're handling things fairly and appropriately. And in the end, we'll be protecting our policyholders, we'll be protecting the company's reputation, and we'll also be protecting the company's financial assets. So with that, we have a couple of questions just to kind of take some of these learnings and put them into practice. So if you can please use your chat feature and indicate either yes or the letter A, or no or the letter B to this specific scenario. So Dan writes on a company survey that he received, could someone please contact me regarding a question I have about the value of my account? Would you consider that to be a complaint? A, yes, or B, no? I'm going to check the chats here and the Q&A. Excellent. You're all correct. That is not a complaint. He's asking a question. He's asking for some outreach, but he's not expressing a concern. It is in writing. That is true, but it's not a statement of dissatisfaction. He's just asking for someone to give him a call. So that is not a complaint. Our last scenario of application here, Lucy clicks on the Contact Us button from the company's website, and we've all had that happen, and she said, you paid me the wrong surrender value on my contract. Why can't you get this right? Fix this. Is that a complaint? Type A for yes or B for no. You're all correct again. She put something in writing and she's stating her dissatisfaction. The fact that it came in from the company's contact form versus a written letter doesn't matter. It's still a written statement of dissatisfaction. So yes, absolutely, that is a complaint. So with that, I will pause here and just give you an opportunity, if you do have any questions, to put those questions into your chat or the Q&A feature. But in the meantime, I'm just going to give you some reminders so you have a chance to type any questions if you do have them. First reminder is that following this event, we do send out a survey, and we ask you how we do. We ask for your input regarding the event, and we ask for your insight on future activities, etc. So when you do receive that survey, which will come to you via email, we greatly appreciate your feedback. That is always, always helpful to us. Second, I want to make you aware of the fact that if you are looking to receive a certificate of attendance for this event, we're not doing certificates by session, it's for the whole aggregated event, we would be happy to send those to you after the event, later this week, early next week, and we can provide you with a certificate of attendance template for your own use if you need that because you would like to self-submit for CLE or CE credit with an organization that you're involved with. If that is of interest to you, you may email Nancy Perez at cefli.org, and we will get that information turned over to you in the upcoming days.